So we can record this session and I'll post it to the portal, the student portal, which you have the link to in your email, and I'll also send it out after this session. I'll post the video and the homework, the tablature to that website link, and just to go over a few different things that we'll be using on Zoom. You can go to a chat box. If you look at your bottom kind of control bar, your chat box is the way that you'll be communicating with me mostly. At the end of the sessions, I'll leave 5 to 10 minutes for questions where I can unmute you and you can ask your questions to me via Zoom, via audio, but we're going to be using the chat box for questions if you have questions during an explanation, so I don't get interrupted by, so my flow doesn't get interrupted, basically. So make sure you're muted as well. There's a button in the bottom left corner, and you can click on that button, and that will mute you. You can stop your video if you'd like to. I like to see you, so I can see if you're confused, if you're happy, if you're getting it. It helps me. And that is about it. Alrighty. So I'm going to share the PDF. If you haven't gotten it, I added a few things today, but I'm sharing that into the chat box if it works. Seems to not be working. Let's see if I share it here. Okay, that's weird. I'll send out the email one more time so you can find it in your email message. This is just going to be the attachment. But you should have the tab with like 2 pages of scales or 1.5 pages of scales. Now I sent it again, so if you don't have it pulled up or printed out, there you go. John Lumbum has it, is pulling it up to show you. You should have those tabs, and that's what we're going to be using to reference for this lesson. And not all lessons are going to have tab as extensive as that. This is just kind of to get you going with learning scales on the banjo. And you probably may or may have not learned scales on the banjo, but there's some different ways that I'm approaching it here. So if you feel like the first measure of scale work is elementary for you, just hear me out, and we'll dive into some different ways to approach practicing these scales. And yeah, so let's begin. The way that I like to think about scales is with scale degrees. So I don't necessarily think about the note names. Although I do know the note names, and I don't think it's a bad idea to learn the names of the notes, but I really like to think of the scales in terms of scale degrees. Peter, let me email you the tab right now. Sorry. Okay, Peter. Tab is sent to you, Peter. Okay, cool. So I like to think in terms of scale degrees, like I was saying, which means the first note of the scale is number 1. The second note, number 2. Third note, number 3. Fourth, 5th, 6th, 7th, and then 8 or 1 again. And the reason for that is when I'm approaching improvisation, I like to think in chord tones, and chord tones are just elements of the chord. So like if you have a G chord right here, I like to think in chord tones, which means I'm thinking in terms of these notes that I'm pushing down, which are G, B, D, and G, but are also referred to in scale degrees as 1, 3, 5, and 1. So we'll get into like how to actually start to improvise and how to create your variations in the next coming lessons. But I just want you to keep that in mind, that we're going to be focusing on, and I've highlighted in green, the 1, the root, the 3rd, and the 5th of the G chords in the tab, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. That's why those notes are highlighted. They are the chord tones in G. Okay, let me pull up my tab one more time. So the one sec, I lost it. I'm having all sorts of technical difficulties today. Okay, so got it pulled up. So the first scale is the beginner version of the G major scale, and you should take a stab at this, and if you don't feel comfortable with this scale, do not go on to the advanced version. You want to get this G major beginner scale first. But if you do feel really comfortable with it, then move on to the advanced version, which is just going up to the 12th fret. So it's kind of like an extended melodic way to play that. So I'm going to play the beginner version for you. It goes like this. Like that. Scale degrees, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. So you can do that if you want. You can also write in the final, 8 scale degrees or 9 scale degrees in the first measure. And that might be a good way to practice. Okay, so that note on the 4th fret is actually the 7th scale degree in the G scale. Okay, so the G major scale advance is just going up to the 12th fret. So we're going all the way up to that 12th fret, and then we're descending. So that, I guess if you're looking at the tablature, it's that 12th fret note with the 5 on it. It's the only 12th fret note. That's where you end the scale, and then you're going to descend. And a cool trick about this scale, and one that I teach students a lot, is when you're doing melodic, you've got this position happening twice on the banjo neck, if not more. So 5, 5th fret on the 2nd string, and then 4th fret on the 1st string. And then all you're doing to move up to the next position is sliding those up to the 10th and 9th frets. So it's 5th string, slide it up. So that might help you with jumping up to the next position for this more advanced scale. Like I said, if you don't feel comfortable with the beginner version of it, don't move on to the advanced one. And I promise you, like, we are going to break things down. So if you don't get to the advanced one, you're still going to have a ton to work on, and you're still going to be able to practice the improvisational and melodic, like melody-wise concepts that we're going to be discussing in the next lessons. Okay, so the rest of the scales I'm going to go over, but they are broken down like that. So I've got the beginner version, and then the advanced version. I've got the beginner version, advanced version. So you can pick and choose what you want to learn, because we will be going through this fast, and this week is dedicated to just scales, and I don't expect you to get through the entire tab that we're working on, but you can get into the beginner stuff, and you can, get a good amount out of it without going, crazy, and you will be able to apply that to the fiddle tune we're talking about. Sorry, so I'm muted. I'm going to make sure everybody's muted. You will be able to apply that to the fiddle tunes and to the improvisational concepts. I didn't really go over why we learn scales, but I learn scales and I teach scales because they're a really great roadmap for learning the banjo neck, so learning the notes, learning the scale degrees, and learning the chords, but also because a lot of the fiddle tunes that we play on a melodic style are just using scale fragments. So they're using little parts like 4 notes ascending, 4 notes descending, or as we'll get into later in the lesson, it will maybe a passage that goes up in thirds, or maybe a passage that goes up in a pattern like the G major scale pattern number 1. And so it's really nice and it's really helpful to get your fingers used to playing these scale scales and scale patterns, because these are where all of the notes are on the neck for the fiddle tunes that we're learning in G major, at least for this course. So that being said, we are playing bluegrass, and G major is not the only tonality, mode, whatever you want to call it, that we hear. So a lot of songs do sound like G major, like Turkey in the Straw. We're going to get into that. So that uses all notes with the G major scale. But other songs like Salt Creek that uses notes that are still in the G major tonality, but there's one small difference. And if you look at measure 5, you'll see where I'm going with this. And it's the G Mixolydian scale. And the G Mixolydian scale is very, very similar to the G major scale. It's just one note difference, and that note is the F natural. So instead of playing the F sharp like in our G major scale, which is on the 4th fret, first string, we're playing F natural. So there's a slight finger change there. I'm actually playing, instead of middle and index there, I'm playing ring and index. And that is the Mixolydian scale. So you'll hear that in songs like Salt Creek, Red Haired Boy, I believe June Apple. And if you know any, just chime in here. And Tom, I'll get to your question in just a second. And then we've got our G Mixolydian scale, which is the advanced version. And this is the same as doing the G major scale, except you're changing that 4th fret note to a 3rd fret note on the first string. So it sounds like this. Jay Hertzig, yeah, I've been trying to send the tab in the chat box, but it's not going through. So you can go to your email. You should have gotten an email from me with it. Maybe, yeah, you should have gotten an email with the tab. Regardless, you are going to get the tab. I'm going to post it on the student portal, so you can download it there. And there you go, Joe Brown. I gotta say, Joe Brown hit me up a couple days ago with an awesome tip about Zoom. They for some reason have this algorithm where they try to mix out background noise, and when you're playing a musical instrument, that algorithm really messes up how the instrument sounds. So he gave me a tip on how to make that sound like more normal, which I'm hoping, I have it turned on right now. Original sound is what it's called. So I'm hoping that's coming through all right, and it's not distorting or phasing in a weird way as it has in the past. So I've got a couple questions. Tom, thanks, John. Tom said, "Can you talk a little about using thumb versus middle on the 5th string?" Yeah, it's a preference. I think there are instances where a finger is going to be easier for me for these scales. I learned them using thumb, and feels better to me to use thumb. But like I said, I learned them that way. That's not to say you couldn't practice like that and get that comfortable. That's totally like putting my fingers in that position. It's not hard. It feels relatively smooth moving from this position to this position. But I wasn't playing that lick or that scale at full speed. So I do know that like when we get into the patterns, that's going to be a little bit more difficult without using your thumb. It's just a little bit more, it's a little bit more messy there. When you can just kind of like shift back, you know, pinky and ring off and put these two on, and your thumb's just hanging out on the 10th fret. So it depends on the situation. I know it's not easy when you're first getting started, but yeah, I would try to use thumb for these scales, especially when we get to the patterns. It's going to be a lot more difficult and more frustrating if you try to use your fingers. Eric says on the 7th measure, do you fret the 5th string? Do you fret 5th fret 2nd string with middle finger? Let's see. 7th, 5th fret 2nd string. Trying to find that 5th fret 2nd string. Oh, you can do that. So yeah, you can do it either way. That's another personal preference. And I don't write the left-hand fingerings in here. Maybe I should, but I don't write the left-hand fingerings in here because I feel like it is a personal preference, and a lot of them are self-explanatory. But you can do that, stretching it like that, and then you can bring them together for that slide up. But you can also do that, and sometimes I'll even do that, but that feels less comfortable. Yeah. I'll do it either way, though. Like, you'll see me. Yeah, I'll do licks, and I'll play it like that, and sometimes I'll play it like that. So it's worth it to get comfortable both ways. But for this course, just settle on one and go with that, because there's already going to be a lot for you to take in, as you can see. Just wait until we get to 6 versions of Turkey in the Straw. That's going to be fun. Okay, so we've got the major scale, beginner and advanced, and we've got the Mixolydian scale, beginner and advanced. Do we have any questions about those scales or about the differences, fingerings, anything to do with those just basic G major scales? Okay, cool. What is Kay typing? She went like this, and I feel like that was it. I can unmute you. Or no, I can't.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, my question was about using a metronome. Today I practiced, right? And are you going to talk about speed for practicing them?
That's a great question. So it's something that I did not go over, so I'm glad you reminded me that. I use a metronome called Pro Metronome. If it loads, it looks like this on my iPhone. I also have an analog one, and to be honest, it's nice to practice with an analog device. I'll sometimes turn my phone on airplane mode, and that helps, so I don't get notifications. But what I do is I like to turn it to 70 and 4/4, and that's a good warm-up tempo. And 80 is also a good warm-up tempo. But when you're practicing these scales, you can practice them 3 ways. You can practice them 1 note per click. Two notes. Or 3. or 4. So you hear that I'm going 1 note per click, and then I add 2 notes per click, and then 4 notes per click. You can do 3 notes per click. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's not as easy or as clear cut as 2 notes, but I would say practice 1 note per click to start off. Make sure you get it down, and then practice 2 notes per click with the metronome. And you can build your speed gradually by moving the metronome up, 2 clicks, 3 clicks, or 5 clicks. If you, like when you're getting to the really higher tempos, like 1 click is going to make a difference, but at this point, like you don't really have to do that. And speed is also not something that I'm going to get into that much in this course, because it's more about how to practice this stuff, how to understand it, and actually apply it to your playing. Working on the speed is in a way secondary to understanding it and hearing the notes in your head. You have to go slow to be able to improvise or to practice improvisation. You have to be able to hear notes in your head and then transfer them to your instrument. And once you get better at that, then yes, speed comes into play. But for now, I think most of us, including myself, this is something I practice really slow. Should be practicing really slow when we're doing scales and when we're doing improvisation. On that though, I do think, and I really believe in this, singing what you're playing is really important. And hearing something in your head, like Happy Birthday, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, any little nursery rhyme you can think of and try to put on your instrument is really helpful for improvisation. But also singing these scales out loud, practicing them on different notes. I'm going to get into that in a second. Starting them on different notes, I should say. I'll get into that. These are great ways to kind of get creative with your scale practice so it doesn't feel monotonous over time, because scales can feel very academic and boring, but they don't have to. So Doug said, do you have a quick way to describe what the Mixolydian scale? It just pertains to melodic music. Mixolydian scale you don't need to know this information, but it's a mode in the key of C. Don't need to know that information. I'm just saying when you're going through your modes in C, you have Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and then you have Mixolydian, which is the 5th mode in the key of C. Basically, it's just a G scale with a flat 7. It's not useful information. Like I say Mixolydian, but I also put in parentheses flat 7 because it's a G scale with a flat 7. G scale with a flat 7. Don't worry about any of the theory stuff that I just said. That's as dense as I'll get this whole time, I hope. Okay, so we've gone over metronome stuff. Now let me talk to you about how I think you should practice. Gary, yeah, it's cool stuff. Like I'm totally into theory, and maybe one day I'll do like a theory course for beginners. But it's overwhelming to a lot of people, and I don't think it's necessary right now, because we just want to have the framework. We want to apply our ears and then start to create some stuff. So practicing these scales, you've noticed that in the first 4 stanzas, I've highlighted the chord tones of the scales. And what I want you to do, this is the main part of your homework. I want you to practice the scales starting on each one of these notes. So what that means is, instead of just starting the scale at the beginning, I want you to start it on the 3rd note, for example. If we're looking at measure 1, you can start the scale. start it right there on the third scale degree, which is also the third scale degree, which is the second string open. Or you can start the scale on first string open. Or you can start it on the fifth string, which is just a descending scale. If you look at the second line and you start it on the fifth string, it goes like this. What if you started it on the ninth fret first string, which is the third scale degree? Or 12th fret. Now Mixolydian. No, I missed one. Okay. So this is a different way to practice scales that is going to lend itself really nicely into the arrangements that we're going to be working on, and different variations and improvising. Because just to give you a little taste, when I approach improvising or coming up with an arrangement, I think of chord tones, and I think of, okay, so what's a target tone that I can aim for? And usually the target tones that I'm aiming for are the chord tones, the arpeggio tones, over the chord that is being played. So in the case of G, that would be the 1, the 3, or the 5. So I'm aiming to start my improvisation with one of these tones. So what if I, started it with the fifth scale degree? Or what if I started it with the third, but up here? It just kind of unlocks different ways for you to approach improvisation. I don't want to bog you down with that right now because you still haven't learned the scales yet, but I just wanted to give you a taste of where we're going with these lessons, is into that realm of creativity, but with kind of restraints, so we can learn it and we can be creative within that framework. Doug says, are you saying that when you improvise, you may throw in a chunk of these scales? Yes, and we will get more into that in the next lesson. I have to look at the lesson plans. That's why I pulled that up. Yes, we'll talk about that a little bit in the next lesson, but really we get into that in lesson number 3, because we're going to be talking about melodies in lesson number 2, which I'm excited about. First, let's do the scales. So back to the tablature page. We've gone over the first 4 lines. Now we're going to get into the actual scale patterns. And these are patterns that you will find in fiddle tunes and in people's improvisations over fiddle tunes. And the first major scale pattern is one that I like to call 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. And that just refers to the scale degrees. So what we're doing is we're going 1, 2, 3, back to 1, and then we're doing 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4. Okay, so that's the beginner version of that. And one sec. Kyle said, why is there no 7th up the neck on Mixolydian? I'm trying to find what you're talking about. Kyle, I need you to be more specific with the location in the tab. So major scale pattern, I'm looking at measure 9, just to be clear, we're looking at the major scale pattern. We're not at Mixolydian just yet. So that time I played measures 9 and 10, the full ascending G major scale pattern number 1. Now, here's the advanced one. We're going to go up to the 12th fret. And this is still major scale, so we're still playing F sharp. We're not playing F natural. So I'll do it with a metronome. If you want to play along, if you do know this, feel free to play along. I'm going to do 2 notes per click. So da, 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4. Messed up that last measure. Like that. So it is really long. It's 4 measures long, or longer than that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 measures long, and in a way, it's kind of meditative and really nice to practice once you get the feel of it in your right hand, especially because I think the right hand is a little bit more complex than the left hand in this. Jay Herzig, what is your email address? And I'll send it to you. I did send it several times before the call, so I'll send it to you right now so you can follow along. Eric said, regarding singing the notes out loud, do you sing out the name of the note that you're playing, or you just sing the number of the scale degree? I usually just sing the actual pitch. It's hard for me to focus on the scale degree or the name of the note while I'm practicing just hearing the actual pitch in my head. That's the most important thing to practice, is the pitch. Let me email. Okay, tab is sent, Jay Herzig. What is your first name, by the way? Lance and Drewsom said, can you put the right hand fingering for the patterns to help us with that? Jim, thanks, Jim. Right hand fingering for the patterns. Yeah, the right hand fingering is in the tab. So you can look at that and that should help you. I made sure to put them in there because I know it can be confusing and a little bit difficult. There's a lot of inside stuff happening. I don't recommend barring. I think barring is less efficient than not. Jim, can you just confirm with me that you got the tab when you get it? Oh, all good, Lance. Okay, so we got G major scale pattern number 1, beginner, and advanced. And by the point that by the time that you get to these scale patterns, you should be more familiar with the 1st, 3rd, and 5th scale degrees. So you can start your scale patterns in different places. So for example, you can start the G major scale pattern. So I started on the 3rd, or you can start right here. So I started that pattern at the beginning of the 10th measure, and that was starting on the 5th. So you can start to incorporate that practice style into the patterns there. Okay, so now the Mixolydian scale pattern. So it's a little bit more of a stretch there. We're using index and pinky for the Mixolydian scale pattern. On the index is on the 6th fret 2nd string, pinky is on the 9th fret 3rd string. You can leave your index down there the whole time. This is measure 17 that I'm on. And so, actually 18 now. So, if we compare this to the major scale, that's our major scale, is moving their index finger up to the 7th fret 2nd string. So it's a completely different feel, in my opinion, than the Mixolydian. And so the advanced pattern, the advanced Mixolydian scale is So there's only the 20th measure in the tab that's like different than the major one. So I definitely recommend learning the major one first in its entirety and then moving on to the Mixolydian one. Because if you take the time to learn the major one, then you know the pattern, you know the right hand stuff. All you're doing is changing one note with your left hand. And that's creating the Mixolydian one. Okay, so Johnny had a question. Why did you pick Mixolydian as opposed to minor? Is it going to fit in a song later? Yes, that is the idea. And minor would mean we're changing keys to G minor. And I want to keep this focused on G major. Maybe I'll do minor classes another time, but Mixolydian is just a slightly different version of the G major scale, and it's heard a lot in bluegrass vocabulary with improvisation and with learning tunes. So that's why. Tell me again how many scales are derived from the G scale. How many scales are derived from the G scale? Well, this is where, like, if you're practicing starting your scale on a different note. So if, say we start our scale on the 3rd scale degree of G, which is the B. Shoot. Say we go B up to this D, back down to B. That's technically a mode. That's technically a different mode from G. That's like still all the notes in the G scale, but it's technically the Phrygian mode in G when you're starting on the B. Like I said before, the theory stuff, it's dense and it's not necessary to really know the names of these things. All you need to know is, like, I'm still playing a G scale, I'm starting on a B note. Howard said, when we practice these scales starting on other notes, does the right hand fingering stay the same? Yes, right hand fingering should stay the same. You're just changing the context of where you're starting the scale, where you're starting the phrase, and we'll get into that in a couple lessons. If you start on a B note, does it not become a B scale? No, it does not become a B scale, because all of the rest of the notes that you're playing are in the key of G major. So, the next 7 notes are all part of the G scale. B, C natural, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. If you went B to B, to make it a B scale, it would sound like this. So that sounds like a major scale instead of. So it very much has the tonality of a G chord, whereas this, let me see if I can do it melodic style. That sounds like a B scale. Do you hear the difference? It's a little, I can't even see. All right, you hear it? Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Where is Jim Herzig? How's he doing? How are you doing? Where are you? You doing well? You got it, the tab, Jim? Thumbs up or down? Jim, did you get the tab? Yes, 2 pages. You got it? Okay, good. Awesome. Yeah, I will send, you know, I will, Harlan, I'm going to send everybody it again, and I'll add your email to the list. I don't know why some emails didn't get through, but I'll make sure everybody's added onto the list. And I'm also going to post it onto the student portal, so you'll be able to download it there and practice it this week. So no problem. And this last scale that we're going to be looking at is the G major scale pattern number 2. It's in thirds. This is one of my favorite ones, but it's also really challenging, right hand and left hand, but more right hand. Sounds like this, and this is measure 25. Mixolydian. There's a typo at the end of that Mixolydian. I'll change that when I upload it. So the thirds is going up a third. So G to B, and then it's going down a second, and then up a third, down a second, up a third. So you can see in the right hand, there's a lot of thumb, index, and then dropping your thumb down to the second string, and then middle. Thumb, index, thumb, middle. Which does not make this the easiest scale to play. I'd say if you don't get to this scale at all, that is totally fine. Don't worry about it. I'll throw it in a little bit in Turkey in the Straw, but I really want you to focus on practicing the first 4 lines of this and getting into the major scale pattern number 1, but really practicing the first 4 lines of this starting on the different scale degrees. That is your homework, is to make sure you've nailed the first 4 stanzas of the tablature and then move on to the rest of it. And we'll do our practice session on Thursday so you can see how I practice and practice along with me, because there's not a lot of practice going on in these lessons, but we will definitely do it multiple times so you can practice it with me at a couple different tempi in the practice sessions. And Sam has a question, and if anybody has questions right now is a great time to ask it, because we're just about out of our 45-minute time. So just ask away if you do have questions. And there will be Thursday for questions as well. So Sam said, Bennett, can you explain thirds? And yeah, thirds is just an interval, so it's a distance between 2 notes. If you have a major scale, so say we're going to do our G major scale just on our first string, so we can see the whole steps and the half steps, just on our 3rd string, it would look like this. We'll just go up to the 4th scale degree. That's G, A, B, C. And that's on the 3rd string. Now, a second is going up to the 2nd scale degree. So that's going up to an A. That's the distance between a G and an A. is a second. The distance between a G and an A flat is a minor second. So G, A, second, G, A flat, minor second. And now G, B is a third. G, B flat, the distance is a minor third. So it's just intervals, and intervals can be G to, that sounds dissonant, but that's because it's the distance of a major seventh. You're hearing a major seventh interval there. That's the distance between G and an F natural, which is a dominant seventh or flat seventh interval. Does that make sense? Cool. I love it. I love the theory stuff. It's just I don't want to scare anybody off. Joe said, are we going to be learning songs from tab or by ear? We're going to be doing a little bit of both, because I think tab is helpful for demonstrating some things. But as you'll hear me say a lot in this class, learning by ear is really, really important. I'm going to go over how I transcribe so you can start to do that for yourself. Transcribing meaning learning by ear. I don't necessarily write things down when I'm learning a song. I'll just try to learn it and then play it along with the recording. And then I'll teach you how to use these scales in different ways so you can actually learn melodies. Like Whiskey Before Breakfast is a great one to practice with these scales. And yeah, we'll get into learning by ear, but there will be some tab as well. And Jim said, a minor chord flats the third note of the scale. Correct. You got it. Yeah, exactly. A minor chord has, so G minor versus G major. G minor is root, so 1, 3, which is a minor 3. So 1, flat 3, and then 5. Whereas a major chord has 1, natural 3, 5. So there's one note difference between a major chord and a minor chord. And whoever asked about barring, in this case, K, for minor chords, yes, I would bar. Gary said, probably down to a personal preference, but do you bend your finger picks in towards your fingertip? I leave mine fairly extended, and I'm wondering if bending them could clean up my playing. I bend them in towards my finger. I don't know if you can see that, but I really like to have them like touching my fingers, so it's almost like I'm playing with my fingers. But I've seen other people like Bela Fleck. I don't think he does that. I watched a video recently of him playing, and I think his are poking out quite a bit, and he gets a pretty clean sound. So cleanliness a lot of times comes from just practicing slow. And working on the angle of your pick. So not necessarily how close it is into your finger, but like how is your finger pick situated on your fingers, and how is your hand situated, and how is your pick coming up to touch the string? Is it coming up at an angle, or is it coming up to hit it straight on? Joe said, do you have a song list for the course? Yeah, I was thinking about that. I'm going to put together a song list for the course. There is a record that always comes to mind, and a musician that always comes to mind when I'm thinking about melodic style is Alan Mundy. And Alan is a amazing banjo player, melodic style player. Kind of, Bill Keith made melodic style what it is. He kind of created the style, and Alan Mundy, I think, just took it to another level. And Bill Keith was amazing. He has incredible songs and technical songs like Beating Around the Bush, but Alan Mundy is just like so clean, so tasteful. His timing is perfect. Alan Mundy Festival Favorites Revisited. That is an amazing record to check out. And I think it's like maybe a double record or something, but it's on Spotify, streaming platforms. But that is really, really awesome. And I can't recommend that enough. If you check out Molly Bloom, that is one that comes to mind as one that would use some of these scales. It's in the key of G, as far as I know. It's at least played at a G position. And maybe that would be a good one for us to check out. and maybe we'll transcribe that one. So you're giving me ideas, Joe. Will Blackberry Blossom be in the song list? Yes, definitely. Blackberry Blossom is a great one to learn. These. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with Blackberry Blossom as far as using the scales that we were talking about. And you could hear that I was improvising a little bit around it. But that is a great one to learn if you're just getting into melodic style. Turkey in the Straw is another one we're going to look at. Salt Creek, I think I have them on the curriculum page. I wrote that a while back, and I need to revisit it. Red Hair Boy, June Apple, Temperance Reel is another one. Yeah, and then we're going to go over how to approach learning those and playing them on your instrument, and maybe a couple different variations on it. But I'll create the song list for next week as well, so you can start listening, and I'll post that. Maybe I'll try and create a Spotify playlist for you to listen to, and I can post that on the student portal, so you can just go there and hang out and listen. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Cool, you good? Well, thank you for joining me for this first class. And Thursday we have the practice session at 7 o'clock Eastern time. You'll use this same link that we used for the class, and bring the tab if you have it printed out, or put it on your computer screen, and bring your metronome if you've got one. Cool. Thank you, guys. See you on Thursday.